name is Gitanjali, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Compass Community Chat, a chance for educators from around the world to come together and share their practices, questions, and ideas about using systems thinking for education with Robert Steele today, who will be our expert. So I'll introduce Robert in a second, and since we're populating more, if you want to change your name on your Zoom screen to whatever you want us to call you, you can put your pronouns, whatever you'd like. That'll be great, and we'll have some time to chat later in the call. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, Robert, if you wouldn't mind.
No problem.
Thanks.
Is the sound okay from my side? Okay.
Hello. All right. Robert, would you mind screen sharing?
Sure.
Okay, so while Robert is putting up this slide with his lovely face on it, let me just tell you a little bit about our featured educator today. We're very, very lucky to have Robert speaking with us today. Not only is he president currently of Compass Education, but he's one of the co-founders who kind of envisioned everything that we're working on today. He is a very experienced sustainability and systems thinking practitioner who's worked in sustainable development. He's worked with the UN, for example, on achieving the SDGs since about 2014. And he's currently coming to us today from Laos, where he's working with a project on forestry and biodiversity using systems thinking. So I'm sure he'll tell us more about his experience, and we're very lucky to have him working with us today on applying systems thinking, applying systems leverage points in a way that is deeper than maybe some of us have had experiences with before, just being introduced to the iceberg. Whether you are an old Compass practitioner or you're new and visiting us today, we're very excited to have you. Quick little info about us for those of you watching this on YouTube or just joining us. Next slide, Robert. So Compass Education is all about building a more sustainable world through education. We're a community of educators who are using this tool, among other systems thinking tools, to achieve a more sustainable world. That tool being the Sustainability Compass, our guide to creating a more sustainable world, which thinks that sustainability is not just about nature, it's about achieving systems conditions that are sustainable, looking at nature and the human systems, economy, society, and well-being. So as we're going into it today, if you have more questions about that or anything else, put them in the chat, or you can follow up with us later. And for the moment, I'm going to hand it over to Robert to begin chatting with us.
All right. Thank you, Gitanjali. Nice to see a lot of people I know and a few people I don't know, but I'm glad that you could make it on this Saturday morning, afternoon, early evening. It's good. It's raining here in Vientiane, which is nice. Cools down the temperature because it's quite hot usually, as you know, most of you coming from Asia. So yeah, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to share a little bit different perspective on system thinking and the tools of system thinking that maybe will allow you to, as practitioners and educators, to want to dig deeper. There's a lot more to system thinking than what Compass Education is currently offering, but we're evolving, as you know, and continuing to go deeper, depending on what educators need for the classroom, of course, and where their students are. So this is definitely a deeper dive into this idea of leverage points, in which I think all of you now are quite common in using. Leverage point, where do we make change? So hopefully this will give you a bit more insight into when you talk with your students or colleagues, or even use it yourself, what is it actually are we talking about, and how do we apply leverage points, okay, to make system change? So where does the term lever or leverage point come from? As I understand from my own research, Archimedes is really the first kind of, I guess, person or philosopher, mathematician to use this idea of lever. And he's quoted or given credit for saying, "Give me a place to stand, and with a lever, I will move the world." So that's, I think, what we're all trying to do, is to move through education, the systems of the world through our students' agency, through student agency, to create a different world, a better world, a more sustainable world. Now, there's a key axiom of system thinking that is really super important to remember. And I guess it underlies everything, is that system structure determines the behavior of each system element in that system, and ultimately the behavior of the entire system. So it really comes down to structure. That's really key. And I think most of you are quite familiar and use the iceberg. So the iceberg is the preeminent, I think, foundation of system thinking, the structure of thinking, right? And using tools like the iceberg, the field of system thinking really is helping us to move away from the events side of things, the things we see, or we hear in the news, the things that make us react, okay? Those are the events at the top of the surface of the water, of the iceberg. It's what we see. But obviously, there's a lot underneath that is not visible. And these, as you all know, are the various layers of the iceberg: patterns of behavior, structures, and mental models. So system thinking helps us move from these events to the lower levels of patterns of behavior to then understand what produces that behavior, which is the system structure and the dynamics of and the arrangement of the elements in the system. But of course, at the very end, especially in human systems, and systems really are, how do you say, a system is an interaction of elements towards a purpose, right? It has a function. So at the bottom of the iceberg is the mental model, right? Because when we talk about human systems, they have a purpose and someone designs them, whether it's an economic system or a political system or an education system. And it's the people that design them. What is their value system? What assumptions do they make? What is their worldview and beliefs? So that's ultimately what is going to change the system for the very long term, but it's also not easy to change people's worldviews or mental models. It takes time. So system thinking really also helps us to find where are the important places for intervention. That's really what it's about, to change the long-term behavior of the system. I put up this image here, which is one that I've used in Indonesia when I was working there. If you ever live in Jakarta, you know the traffic situation. So this is a bit old, before they had the mass transit system that they are starting to expand on. But you can see that the whole idea is just congestion, right? Congestion in the roads and traffic is a problem. So if you do a simple map of that, you can see some of the key elements. There's road capacity, there's road overcrowding, traffic, there's where people live, the population that affects road overcrowding, and the rate of people that might move to an area like Kamang, which is very popular for foreigners to live. And that's the attractiveness of that area. Good schools, good restaurants, pleasant environment. And that also has something, is influenced by quality of life. And of course, in say a city like Jakarta or Bangkok or many places, this whole idea of car ownership, right? So if you think about what are the leverage points, maybe, it could be several, right? It could be rates of people moving into a place. Could you intervene there? Or it could be people's idea of what is quality of life, right? That's a mental model. As well as we might go at the structure side, up at road capacity, right? These days, it might be more than road capacity. It's actually transportation infrastructure, right, with more options. And then, of course, really influencing that or putting pressure on that is this idea of owning a car, right? Whether it's convenience or status, you know, whatever it might be, that's also a value or a mental model. So all of these are potential places to intervene. I was talking with Gitanjali yesterday, and you think about like systems, let's say Bangkok or even the US, we don't have the infrastructure for public transportation, for for bullet trains or other types of rail. In some cities, yes, like San Francisco or Boston or New York and so forth. But most of it's the road network, right? Highways and freeways and so forth. And there is also this general idea, I think, of two cars, right? A family has two-car garage. It's just, you have to own a car. And that's part of the quality of life. But if you were to go to Denmark, it's just the opposite, right? Everyone bicycles, let's say in Copenhagen, even as I've seen politicians, the prime minister. So it's not an issue of status. Maybe the bicycle is status, but I think it's more about people's worldview and their idea of quality of life. And then, of course, that influences the system design of bike paths and public transportation and so forth. You can stop, anyone can stop me at any time as we go through this. The system iceberg helps us to start to ask the right questions towards understanding where is the best place to leverage change in a system as we move down from events to trends and patterns, structures, and mental models. And of course, as we move down, we increase our understanding of the system, but it also increases the potential leverage to change the system, right? At the top, we can change events. Let's say that, drug use, right? For the longest time, the war on drugs was about basically locking up drug users, right? But it hasn't slowed down drug use. It's actually still proliferating. So that's what we might consider a knee-jerk reaction. And more, it's about trends and patterns, like opioid use is increasing in many countries, whether it's opioids or methamphetamines or whatever, it's just drugs. So you have to start to think about what is the trend, what demographic is using drugs, where are the communities, and what is the trend? So that's the behavior of the system. And so this is where we anticipate and plan, and into what is producing those behavior trends. And when we say behavior, we're not necessarily talking about one individual's behavior, but the behavior of the system itself, okay, to produce these type of outcomes at the top. So we look down at the structure, and this is where design comes in. The type of interventions are based on design or redesign. And then finally, it's about transforming mental models. Now, ultimately, we have to move beyond tools like the iceberg, really for robust analysis and real long-term system change. We need to see how things interact. What is the arrangement of the system? So we use tools like causal loop diagrams, figure out what are the pathways of cause and effect, where are the feedback loops, and where the delays in the system are between a cause and a response. So this is something deeper that if you're really going to, I think, address real leverage points for change, you need to go from iceberg, which is a starting tool, to start asking these questions, to building system models, which are also mental models. I would say that the best causal models are built collaboratively. So you have different people with different perspectives and diverse backgrounds coming in and building a model together collaboratively. Now, when we get to leverage points, essentially, this is what we're here for. These are places in a system within complex systems, whether it be a company, an economy, our body, city, an ecosystem, or even the universe, where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything. And this is a famous quote from, I would say, the popularizer of leverage points, Meadows, and also system thinking. Meadows was from MIT and popularized this with several articles in the 90s. And she's also the author of Limits to Growth, or the co-author. So it's really important for us, especially sustainability-minded people, to understand where the connections are between the economics, the environment, the society, and the human well-being system, so that we, in terms of sustainability changes. If we want to be sustainable in the future, have a sustainable community, a sustainable world, we have to understand all four dimensions, which i.e. is the compass, and understand the interactions, and then find where are the long-term leverage points, where are the easy, low-hanging, what we call low impact leverage points, and where are the high impact leverage points. There's a picture of Danella, and this is her famous article that she wrote. The story is that she was actually attending in 1997, I believe, or around that time, a meeting on the North American Free Trade Agreement, and she was in the audience. And as she said that, kind of paraphrasing here, all these liberals were basically stumbling around, coming up with these solutions that I knew were inherently wrong. You know, they were going with intuition. And as you read what her writings, Danella Meadows, she often says, and I think is influenced from Jay Forrester, which was her mentor, that real leverage points, real system change is often counterintuitive, right? So she jumped up in this meeting, went and ripped off the whiteboard paper, so that, or not the whiteboard, the flip chart paper, and started basically listing what she thought were the places to intervene in systems. And this meeting, or this list, became this paper that you see, Leverage Points, Places to Intervene in a System. And at the beginning, she had identified 9 leverage points in descending order of effectiveness, from low leverage to high impact leverage, which I'll show you in a minute. Eventually, I think in 1999, she revised her paper and identified 12 leverage points, which is what is kind of used now. So here's Danella Meadows' 12 leverage points. So from descending order of low impact, she categorized them as physical, informational, social, and conscious. I won't spend too much time of our time because we only have 45 minutes altogether, but the low impact are easier leverage points to do, that though they're easier, they tend to not, they might have short-term fixes, but they don't have long-term change on really complex systems. So you can change constants and parameters, like number 12 at the top, such as raising the minimum wage, lowering tax rate, increasing, decreasing enrollment standards, things like that. So they help for sure, but they're not going to be game changers, let's put it that way. There's also changing the size of buffers, right? That's a reservoir or a stock. So oftentimes you see in ecology, they want to have captive breeding programs of endangered wildlife. But what's really in essence is the size of the reserve, right? So you have to increase also the size of the ecosystem, which these days is really hard with the rate of development. They're actually being eaten away and fragmented. So, you know, you can protect national parks, but with the deeper system structure, those get eroded away, smaller and smaller. So they help for a time, for sure. And then there is the structure of stock and flows, building new networks, moving, rearranging things, and so forth. When you get down to the informational side of the leverage points, excuse me, she's talking more about, I guess, the dynamics of the system, the feedback, and how you manipulate the feedback, whether you're shortening or lengthening the time of delay. So maybe the time to build new housing relative to changes in demand. Nowadays, we see, I think in China, they have these prefab high rises they can build in essentially 6 weeks, where it once took maybe a high rise even a year, right? So they're really looking at the demand and the rate to actually fulfill the demand. So that's where maybe intervening at the delay between where the demand comes and being able to deliver the housing or the office space. There's also the strength of balancing feedback loops. So balancing feedback loops are the regulators, right? Like a thermostat. So in order to not use so much energy, we've been, I think, conditioned these days to set our thermostats indoors in Asia, usually to around 24 or 25, 26, depending on the country. So that's basically an intervention point to strengthen balancing feedback, right? But again, they're more low impact in terms of overall game changers, but they make us feel good and they do have some effect. As you keep going down, you can think about where can we actually intervene in the reinforcing feedback mechanism. Like if we think of climate change, you think about emissions coming from combustion vehicles burning a fossil fuel, and then basically that's causing global warming. The temperature or the CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing, which is increasing the greenhouse effect of our planet, which is then exacerbating or reinforcing the climate change. Basically, the patterns of climate is really starting to accelerate and change quickly. And that comes back around if we have more droughts, more heat waves. Maybe people use their cars more, they use air conditioners more, and you can see that that's a reinforcing mechanism where we can intervene. Maybe one intervention is carbon tax, right? Where if you tax the carbon that people produce, that's going to slow down the burning of carbon. So that's an intervention in the informational side. If you go down lower, there's the social leverage points. And these are really more about societal structural aspects, from the rules of the system to who has power and also the goals of the system. And so if you look at that, and you can think about imposing strict rules on water use, which I think in many countries in the Western US now, they're experiencing what I read was a 1,200-year drought. Like it hasn't been this bad for 1,200 years, and it's been going on for 20 years. And Lake Mead is the lowest it's been since basically they filled it up. So all cities are having to now put strict regulations on water use. But you still have populations moving there. You still golf courses being built, around Las Vegas and Phoenix, and so eventually there's just more demand. And of course, with the economic system that based on profit and based on growth, then you're going to still have increasing water demand bumping up against that. So the rules of the system help. They can be much stronger, but again, there is a pushback on all of this if the system structure isn't changed. And then the power to add or change and self-organized systems. This is where we really come with redesign of the system, like changing how maybe suburbs are actually how they're designed. So they're not using grass, right? Our golf courses, if we're using the same example, that they might have the greenway, but maybe all around the greenway, there's still xeriscape, right? It's still desert or natural landscape. So those are ways that you change kind of the structure itself and the elements. And then of course, the goals of the system. This is where you get real power. If you change the goal, you change everything. I think the classic example is most of the world, the number one goal for a country's well-being and development, unfortunately, is GDP, right? Economic growth. And that's what we compare. We benchmark to other countries. We benchmark to the past, right? That's what drives everything. But maybe rethinking like a country such as Bhutan, where they've introduced gross national happiness. So if that were to become the world model, how that would be a game changer, right? If really making sure people were happy and well and content, if that's our goal, not GDP, the whole system going to change. So those, as you get deeper. And then finally, there's the conscious level, as she calls it. And this is really about the mental model. So the mindset or paradigm out of which a system arises. So I think from Compass Education, we're really on a mission to inculcate students to be system thinkers, to move away from reductionist, linear, siloed thinking. So that's an example. And then there's the power of transcending paradigms. So this is really, I think, where international school is doing really well, where you understand, let's say, theory of knowledge, right? And you understand different religions, different points of view, different ideologies, political views, and you don't try to grab onto one and say this is the best. You just look at all and what their strengths are, their benefits, their disadvantages, and then actually the learner can think about what is the best system, right? Which is obviously probably going to be a hybrid, a new type of system. So this ability to transcend paradigms is really strong. So that's a basic, quick outline. You can see from this diagram is just kind of reinforce the power of these different leverage points. If you have a system and you want to move it and you're trying to, if you've ever had to jack up a car or try to put a big stick or log under a rock to try to move it, you know, if you're really close to that object, it's really hard to move. But if you move away and you have a longer tool or a longer jack, it's much easier. So the same in an analogy with these 12 leverage points. Now,
Robert, I think just to pause for a second, because we have about 15, 20 minutes left. Okay. I wonder if we can pause for some questions or maybe the example that you have planned for us to look at.
Okay, so just real quick, in 2017, there was a guy named Abson who kind of took the 12 leverage points are a bit complex. So he kind of repackaged them based on their relationships and their kind of character. So he put them under parameters, feedbacks, design, and intent. And you can see I kind of color coded these based on that. So it's the same framework, but kind of repackaged and reinterpreted to make it, I guess, conceptually easier. So as I mentioned, the key is understanding where problems are symptoms rather than root causes. And low leverage points usually are applied at intermediate causes are very immediate causes, but as I emphasize, they don't cause whole system change. We have to go deeper to the root causes. As you know, that's what we've all been trying to do. So one point before we go to Miro, which I want to have an example that we can talk about, is that I think some people get confused that leverage points are the innovation itself, are the new thing, and they aren't. Innovation is what we do at leverage points. So that has to be really clear. Leverage points, and when we do system thinking, is just where is the best place to intervene that's going to have the most impact on the system over time, right? So it can be policies, technologies, cultural change, structural change, but those are the innovations. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing here. We're going to use an example to talk about, because recently I think with COVID, there's this issue of vaccine hesitancy. You know, I'm not saying it's good or bad here, but I have myself 2 vaccines now, which I'm very happy about, but other people are more hesitant. And so to try use these tools to understand how do we manage COVID with this hesitancy that exists? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing here and then go to the, yeah. No, that's still the PowerPoint, isn't it? To go. Sorry.
Robert, would you like us all to look at Miro with you, or shall I send the link? Okay, great.
Okay, so I've set this up. Basically, this morning, I did an iceberg of vaccine hesitancy. Rather than you guys having to, we didn't have enough time, so I just did this. Bring it down. My screen's a bit shaky. So using color-coded, at the top of the iceberg are events like loss of family member or a close friend, the COVID variants start to emerge, those things like the Trump presidency, school closures, China's response to the WHO investigation, the politicization of science, starting even with climate change, um, city and country lockdowns, previous emerging virus outbreaks, all of these events that are on. So obviously, as you know, from using the iceberg, we want to link these events together and try to identify what are some patterns that are basically generating these outcomes. So I just did a quick brainstorm list of different patterns. Reported death after vaccination, especially looking at vaccine hesitancy. COVID-related deaths per locality, number of and length of time vaccine science trials and data are available because it was rolled out so quickly. Number of media stories on effects of vaccination, media stories for and against vaccination, economic growth and productivity, unemployment rates, growth of virtual learning and meetings, length of time to roll out vaccines, COVID infection rates, vaccination rates per location. And then, of course, the more structural elements, vaccine efficacy, business policies for customers, country policies on travel, government assistance, health effects from being vaccinated, vaccine access and availability, understanding zoonotic diseases in science, source of information and news, education, pedagogy, and curriculum, vaccine type, government policies, political systems, social media, community connectivity, alternative medicine success, just to give a few. And then, of course, the mental model is political views, belief in conspiracy theories, not just this one, but there is obviously some people are really into all this conspiracy theories. Trust in science and scientists, I think that's waning. Religious beliefs, linear thinker versus system thinker, perceived benefits of being vaccinated, mistrust in vaccines, belief in with respect of medical treatment, nationalism versus globalism. Okay, so that's all. And of course, as I mentioned, just to reinforce, after you do the iceberg, you want to really try to model it. This is the power of going deeper and using more robust system tool. But as educators, I think the iceberg is quite effective because it's really allowing us to ask the deep questions related to these leverage points. So I would just open it up, I guess, right now for maybe even thinking about applying. Do you, from that 12 list here, do you see any that would be potential leverage points, both easy to get things started, but even deeper down? Anticipate and plan, design, transform.
Yeah, so coming from, so first of all, hi, Robert. I'm Lucas. I live in Vientiane, Laos, so maybe you're a neighbor of mine, who knows? Coming from Ohio originally, I think my state was one of the first to sort of like entice, right? Try to entice people to get vaccinations, for those people who were, vaccine hesitant. And so I think a very surface level, top level, simple leverage solution that really wouldn't have much impact would be, offering cash incentives, I think it was, or like phone credit, right, to get vaccines. But that to me seems like something you can see, but it's obviously not a paradigm shift, towards the bottom of the leverage. It's
I might put that like here at government policy, because
that's right. Maybe in between, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because I know this story. Like when they first launched it, there was an increase of 40%, but now a month later, it's back down again, even though the incentive was still there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the first thing that came to mind. And it's like, well, you think about it and it looks good, right? It looks really good. And then you really start to think deeply about it. It's like, that's really not going to affect any real change, is it?
Good, good. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Anyone else on some of these 12 leverage points? Anything to do with buffers, stocks, or reducing delay, or reducing or increasing the speed of feedback?
Robert, I'm thinking about On the green post-its, the vaccine access and availability and where that would fit in the leverage points and the different kinds. I'm thinking, for example, of like the mobile clinics that are handing out vaccines now across the more rural United States, for example. They're totally changing who can access the vaccine and how quickly, not changing people's mindsets. So it's not like paradigm shifting, but it's removing some of the physical barriers. It's a government policy and initiative. Where do you think it would fit in the leverage points?
For sure. I mean, and also access to information, which is I think number 8, right? Or
Okay.
one of those. I can't remember the number, but it's in the informational side. Yeah, giving more people information, especially I think at the early rollout, where can I get vaccinated, right? And how do I find information where the vaccines are available in my county or my province or my city, right? So that access and availability through getting information to the people who need it. So that's definitely a leverage point. It can be a strong one for like community, minority communities, marginalized communities, right? Any others?
If you're looking at sort of like transformative leverage points, I mean, would that be things like actually kind of like science communication in the public realm and kind of teaching maybe children how to deal with fake news and look at science more objectively and so on? Is that the sort of thing we're looking at?
Yes, exactly. Like I just read an article about reimagining science education because I'm doing a keynote in September for the Philippine National Association of Science Teacher Educators. And so this article is basically right now dealing with the mistrust in science and the politicization of science, right? Where now people don't believe science because of the politics. And then science itself, because it's kind of devoid from the rest of the other 3 dimensions of life, right? Scientists go in the laboratory and control situations, and it's not very interdisciplinary, right? There's not a lot of alternative perspectives that scientists take in mind or listen to when they're developing inventions or research, right? In science, I think it's traditionally like, if you can do it, if it's possible, we need to research it. We need to go for it. And this is, I think, the issue that people are having with this gain of function research in virology that could be actually the reason that we are seeing this COVID. If it did escape from a lab, because as I know, there's where the problem is that to go from animal to human is possible. Usually it's a direct transmission, but the virus is not in a state or is not mutated to be able to jump from that human to another human. It takes so much time. But the COVID-2 or the SARS-2 novel coronavirus, it happened so quick. And that's what is throwing some people like, there was not, how did it go from animal to human and human to human so quickly? So again, it's like, yeah, these things, this trust in science. So scientists do things in an isolated, siloed realm. And then I think politics is always going to be a part of science. But then if we open up science to more interdisciplinary, where students are taught science and the consequences of science, right? Within theory of knowledge, say in international school, I think you nailed it on the head. From my opinion, I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, that sounds very interesting. I think you're right. I think one of the troubles with science in schools is that it's often siloed into physics and biology and everything. But we need to start breaking down those barriers and look at systems and
So
systems thinking.
So into education, pedagogy, and curriculum, right?
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Thank you.
So maybe with the time we have left, we can talk about your application, what you think about leverage point, where your challenges are as educators, and has this been at all, it's very quick, helpful in terms of giving you an aha moment or something like that, that then of course as self-learners, you'll go dig deeper or maybe you would like to have a deeper dive or deeper workshop or something on applying leverage points. Any thoughts on the challenges, how you use them in your classroom with the iceberg or with system diagramming?
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly like to go a little deeper on this if there's interest. It's very interesting. I think it's the sort of thing that you need to really spend some time looking at and practicing. But it's very interesting for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree as
45
well. Charlie, I think the immediacy of the example you've given, Robert, right? We actually mentioned it briefly in the meeting I was in before. I'm doing the Compass Educators discussion before this, and I brought up the unsustainability perhaps of lockdown procedures, as a talking point. But I think the immediacy of the example you've given, I think, I'm looking at each of these different little note cards and I'm thinking of examples, right? And I think this is it's a great starting point, I think, for students as well as anyone else in the world. I think this approach really allows people to connect to this a very complex sort of, new way of thinking as well. So I like this a lot.
Okay, good. That's nice to hear.
Robert, question, is there any chance we could access the Miro board?
Yeah, I've given you all access.
Great, okay.
I can put the link in the chat if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't. Yeah, okay.
Potentially put the link in the chat, and I will leave it to your access. You can actually, I will put editor view, so you can mess around with it if you want. You can add things. We can make it collaborative.
Okay, that's great.
Because now
don't delete anything, anyone.
With the few minutes we have left before I ask Robert for some concluding thoughts, I would just like to highlight, if you want to explore more how you can think about leverage, the systems iceberg, or introducing other systems thinking ideas to your students. We do have tons of resources for that, whether you want to dig in this deep into this complexity or kind of slowly introduce them into it. We have several online courses. I think a couple of you are in level 1 right now, our Teaching and Learning for a Sustainable World course. We have some self-directed courses, and we have a free course that introduces you to the Sustainability Compass, all on our website, www.compasseducation.org, linked in the chat. And if you want to go deeper into leverage too, feel free to email us through the website as well, or shoot me a message now, and we can try to follow up and think about opportunities for you to do that. So yeah, Robert, would you like to wrap us up with some concluding thoughts today?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I was a bit nervous because all of you are practitioners and educators, and I'm speaking to you from really application as an educator, so I was quite nervous. So it was good. You made it easy, and I think it's very important as system thinkers and applying tools like the iceberg, which seems to be very popular and very useful. That's why it's popular with students to ask those, to be able to, how do you say, organize a problem and have it make sense using the iceberg, and then to be able to use that to start to ask these deeper questions. Why is it that? What is related to what? What is driving what? What is ultimately the thing, the source, the root cause of what we're seeing right now and experiencing? So I'm really happy that hopefully this community chat will expand and your interest and an application of the actual framework that Danella Meadows developed. Start thinking about how you can apply that, because I don't think even in Compass Education now that there is much application of Meadows's work. So I think that is the next step, is starting to think about using. There's a great paper. I will send it to Gitanjali, or I can put the paper in Miro and you can download it. Okay, it's her paper on places to intervene in the system. And I think and actually I have a couple of papers. I'll put an archive of different papers about this particular issue, or the framework that we're talking about today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yay, I have my compass shirt on too.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
All right. Awesome, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see you again soon. Have a wonderful evening, morning, day.